Hi, everybody. I'm Adelina Acuna. As you just heard, I am the chair of the ACS Bay Area Lawyer Chapter Executive Board. I am so thrilled. This is my 7th consecutive convention, 3 as a law student, 4 as a young attorney. And since they let me on stage, I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to ACS as an organization, to the network. I am so grateful for the opportunities that ACS has provided to me, that they provide to other law students and young lawyers across the country, opportunities for inspiration, for mentorship, for leadership, both here while we're at convention and throughout the year back in our hometowns. So thank you so much to all of you who make us happen and to the staff at National. We really appreciate it. And now it is a distinct pleasure and an honor to introduce Secretary of Labor Thomas Perez. Great. Under Secretary Perez's leadership, the U.S. Department of Labor has focused on raising the minimum wage, on expanding overtime and paid leave to lower middle class and middle class white collar workers, increasing job training, and implementing the bipartisan Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Most recently, one of his efforts has included a bold new proposed rule that would require financial advisors to put their customers' best interests first. As a consumer protection attorney in California, this is very important to me. Thank you, Secretary Perez. Prior to his appointment, he served as an Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the Department of Justice, where he fought to protect voting rights, ensure accountable policing, and crack down on predatory lending. As Director of the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Health and Human Services, he helped ensure access to quality, affordable health care. And previously, he tackled civil rights, criminal justice, and constitutional issues as a special counselor for Senator Ted Kennedy. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Secretary Thomas Perez.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be here, Adelina. Thank you for your kind words, and congratulations to your husband who's a postdoc. He's going to get a raise. That's a good thing. So it's great to be here with a group of serial activists and so many others. And I want to say thank you, first of all, not only to you, but my good friend Caroline Fredrickson, who I've known for a couple decades. We probably shouldn't admit how long we've known each other because that might talk about our age. Caroline is a force of nature and just a spectacular leader for ACS. Thank you for what you have been doing for so long to build ACS into the powerhouse it has become. This is not my first visit here, by the way, and this will not be my last visit here because it is so critically important. I read some of the transcripts of some of the speeches that were delivered. I read the Vice President's remarks. I read Senator Warren's remarks. Certainly have a lot of thoughts about what was said, but I'm here in my official capacity, so I'll keep those thoughts to myself. Okay? As I was preparing for this, I can't help but tell you about a current obsession that I have. And some of you may have the same affliction, which is a couple of months ago, I went to see Hamilton. Okay? And, if you can, maybe have your husband, when he gets that raise, Adelina, maybe you can afford to go see it because it wasn't cheap. But I'm envisioning, as I'm sitting in this room, these similar meetings going on because, as you know, Hamilton was about the founding of our nation and our $10 founding father, to quote Lin-Manuel. And I think about this because the same qualities that resulted in George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, so many other people who helped us win a Revolutionary War that, frankly, if the odds makers of Las Vegas had been around, they would have said, there's no way you're going to win that war. But they won it because they had the qualities of leadership, fearlessness, innovation, forward thinking, and they turned those challenges into opportunities. And they began this journey, which we are discussing in this conference, to form a more perfect union. It's really a timeless journey. And we have seen those remarkable qualities of leadership, fearlessness, innovation, and forward thinking help to make sure that we continued that journey in a positive direction. When the Know Nothing movement came around, that failed because we were able to summon the better angels of optimism and opportunity over the demons of fear, exclusion, and isolation. When we faced a civil war, Abraham Lincoln embodied these qualities, declaring that a country divided cannot survive. When the Industrial Revolution forced working people into unsafe conditions and poverty wages, we banded together to reject the notion that working people's dignity and lives would be capitalism's collateral damage. And when women took to the streets to demand at long last the right to vote, we found the political will to ratify the 19th Amendment and put an end to the omission of half of our nation from our democratic process. And when the Great Depression destroyed our economy and our collective hope, we came together to redefine that social compact. We established a minimum wage, overtime, Social Security, workers' comp. We affirmed the right to collective bargaining, giving rise to the labor movement, the middle class, and shared prosperity. And when civil rights activists stood up to the demand that our nation must finally realize the promise of equal rights for all, when they flooded the streets of this city to march together, they forced our nation to acknowledge the dearth of both jobs and justice that plagued our minority communities. I think about the term jobs and justice a lot because that's not only what the March on Washington was about, that has been what has really defined my life's work. Because no disrespect meant to Lou Gehrig, but I feel like the luckiest man on the face of the earth for the opportunities I've had. Because the March on Washington was about sanitation workers who said, you know what, just because we pick up trash doesn't mean you can treat us like garbage. And we've seen, it was also about African Americans declaring, I am a man, I am a woman. It was about people who had long been marginalized standing up and claiming their right to participate fully. And that, as I said, is what has framed my life's work. And I have seen it firsthand, how labor rights and civil rights are so inextricably intertwined. Because, you know, it's important for us to make sure that people have the right to take a seat at the counter. But as we've heard so frequently, if you can't afford to buy a meal, that right is rather hollow. And in the course of my life's work, I've learned a number of lessons that I think are very relevant to this continuing discussion of how we build a more perfect union at this so intensely important moment in our nation's history. And the first lesson I have learned, and it's a lesson that you have learned as well because you've been part of it, is that the law can be used to write people in or write people out of our national story. The law can build walls that keep people out of full participation in our democracy, and the law can be used to tear down those walls. And the ability of the law to include or exclude, frankly, that's why elections matter, and that's why your work matters, and that's why ACS matters so much, because we've seen examples time and time again. I've been so proud to work for this president who I am certain will go down as one of the most consequential presidents in this nation's history. I have no doubt about that. This president and every single person in this room, we are all about inclusion. And we've seen a number of examples of inclusion during the Obama administration. The first law that he signed, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, it made sure that our statutes don't deprive a worker of their right to take legal action when they learn that they have been victim of pay discrimination. It wrote working women back into the law. As you know, and I worked on this one dating back to 1995, one of my most remarkably proud moments, although it was bittersweet, was when the president signed the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. The law that you know, because so many of you in this room worked on it, provided a number of new critical protections. But one of the most remarkable protections that it provided was it was the first time that I'm aware of that the words lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered appeared in our United States criminal code so that we could protect LGBT communities from hate crimes that were directed at them. The Congress and the president literally wrote the LGBT community into the law. Our work on marriage equality transformed the concept of fundamental fairness from a pipe dream to a reality. And one of the nights I'll never forget is when Eric Holder called me up. It was a Thursday night, and he said, Tom, we're going to be announcing tomorrow that the president and the Justice Department will no longer be defending the indefensible, the Defense of Marriage Act. It was one of my most proudest moments, and it is an example of the work that can be done to make sure that we are including people, not excluding people. The law can be used to write people into our society, our democracy, our economy. But the law alone, I have learned firsthand, is not enough. Because the second lesson I have learned is this: the law is only as good as the will of the people enforcing it, and the will and the energy of the advocacy groups and other external stakeholders outside of government. Success is always going to be having the right people inside government and the right people outside government. And I have seen the absence of that painfully firsthand when I had the privilege of assuming the role as Assistant Attorney General in October of 2009. And I speak to you as someone who proudly served as a career prosecutor in the Bush 1 Justice Department. I started in 1989. I worked as a career civil servant in the Bush administration, Bush 1, and in the Clinton administration. And I'm damn proud of the work that I did under both, because the Civil Rights Division was a great place to work. The respect for the career staff by the non-career staff was palpable. We didn't always agree, but we always had a voice, and our voice was always heard. The Bush 2 administration saw the decimation of the division. And job one when I arrived was to put it back together, to re-empower the career staff, to once again put to use some of our most important and powerful laws. Eric Holder frequently called the Civil Rights Division the crown jewel of the Department of Justice. And when history records the tenure of Eric Holder, his work on marriage equality, his work on the restoration and transformation of civil rights enforcement will be prominently featured in his record of remarkable accomplishments. Thank you, Attorney General Holder. And I'll tell you, and I tell you with great regret, the Labor Department's story was not that different. And the best way to illustrate it is to give you an example. I learned, and I'm going to tell you, I triple-checked this one when I first learned it because I didn't believe it. There was a case involving investigations of potential child labor violations by a very large retailer in the United States, conducted by the Wage and Hour Division in the Bush administration. And notwithstanding the evidence of significant violations by this Fortune 10 company, here was the resolution. The resolution was this: the Department of Labor agreed that prior to entering any of their stores in the future to conduct investigations, they would give them advance notice. Now, the prosecutor in Tom Perez, and I was a career prosecutor for a while, was wondering the following. If you are a prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuting potential drug activity at the corner of Street Y and Street Z, and you want to get rid of that drug trafficking, would it be a best practice, I guess, to announce next Wednesday we will be conducting narcotics enforcement activities? I don't think that was in the U.S. Attorney's Manual when I was at the Department of Justice. But this is precisely what happened. And that is not because of the dedicated career people in the Labor Department. It is because leadership matters and elections matter. And you know what? I'm darn proud of the fact that under our administration, we have reinvigorated enforcement, and our Wage and Hour Division has recovered nearly $1.6 billion in back wages for workers across this country. Because you know what? Enforcement matters. We have one of the best wage and hour administrators in our department's history. And so much of the work has been done because you've been our eyes and ears. And nonprofits across this country have been our eyes and ears. And we have been using our enforcement authority to make sure we protect people because that's our mission. And we've used our regulatory authority to fortify critical pillars of the middle class. And you mentioned back in April, we published a rule to strengthen retirement security and to update the law to reflect the ways that the retirement landscape has changed. When we were 30 years ago watching Leave It a Beaver and Ozzie and Harriet, that era, people would work 30 years in the same job. At the end, they'd get a party, and a pension. And that pension was a defined benefit pension. They didn't have to worry about investment because it was a pension for life. IRA was your elderly uncle, and 401k was a road in the Midwest. Today, in the world of defined contributions, you are the person who has to make critical decisions about your future. And just like lawyers and doctors, when you go to them, they have to look out for you, but not financial advisors. And so we changed the rule to make sure that we had a 21st century consumer protection infrastructure. And we said something pretty radical. You have to put your customers' interests first. Pretty radical concept. We've been sued in 5 different cases by folks who want the right to put their own profits ahead of your best interest. In one case, and I kid you not, they included a claim that said we have a First Amendment right to do so. And I have 4 siblings, they're all doctors. I called them up and I said, guess what? If you're ever accused of malpractice, tell the court that you have a First Amendment right to give bad advice to your patients. See how far that goes. See how long you have a medical practice. I digress. We recently updated the overtime rules to reflect the original standard of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And you know what? This is about what it means to be middle class in America. When I was a kid growing up in Buffalo, New York, I had friends whose parents were managers. They worked 60, 70 hours, very responsible jobs, and they were compensated with a middle class wage. The crown jewel of the Fair Labor Standards Act was the mechanism through which they received that compensation. But that crown jewel, too, has lost its luster for 2 reasons. Number 1, we did not index that threshold, separating overtime eligible from overtime exempt. And number 2, and again, elections matter. In 2004, the Bush administration, and it was their legal right to do so, changed the rules. They took all the leverage from workers and gave it to employers. So you could work 70 hours a week. 90% of your time, 99% of your time, stocking shelves. 1% of your time in management, and you were an exempt manager making as little as $25,000 a year. That's not fair, my friends. And the president directed us to fix it, and we did just that. And I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of the fact that workers are going to get a $12 billion increase over the next 10 years. Because you know what? The issue of wage stagnation is one of the defining pieces of unfinished business. And once again, there was a hearing held yesterday on this because there's a CRA petition that has been introduced because some people on Capitol Hill, I'll let you figure out who they are, would like the right to make sure that you can work 70 hours a week and make $23,000. Do the math. And remarkably, and frankly, inexplicably, one of the witnesses was from the University of Kansas. I love Kansas. What's the matter with Kansas? I'll tell you. Sam Brownback, okay? That's what's the matter with Kansas. And they came in yesterday, and by the way, the guy who testified, poor fella, seriously, I don't begrudge him at all. He drew the short straw. He had to come in. And you know what? He came in to say that the overtime rule was going to wreak havoc on their higher education system. And I said, Sam Brownback's already wreaking havoc on your higher education system. And by the way, who's the highest paid employee in the state of Kansas? Public employee. Take a guess, folks. Bill Self, the selfless coach of the Kansas Jayhawks basketball team. $5 million a year, or $4 to $5 million. And one of the witnesses said if you just took $1 million off of that, you could pay all the overtime you needed. Because, folks, budgets are not simply about priorities. Budgets are moral documents. They reflect the values of an institution and a community. And you know what? Regulations as well reflect the values of the community. And our regulation on overtime reflects the simple value that middle-class jobs deserve a middle-class wage. And that's what we did. And you know what? We did this because it matters. And we did this because the Fair Labor Standards Act had lost its luster, and what was done in 2004, in my judgment, was inconsistent with both the letter and spirit of the law. So again, elections matter. People inside government matter. People outside government holding government accountable matters. And you know what? The third lesson I have learned is the power of persistence. You know the old civil rights song, "We fall down, but we get up." And we get up stronger. And I have seen so many examples of folks falling down, but it's only momentary. I've seen it with my friends in the labor movement. Collective bargaining is one of the most important forces that brought us the middle class in this country in our nation's history. That is a fact. The health of the middle class and the power of collective bargaining and the density of the labor movement go hand in hand. It's not correlation, folks. It's causation. You look at the end of the World War II period to 1980, you see increasing labor union density. You see the power of collective bargaining, and you see the growth of the middle class. That's what it's all about. The collective power of we is what collective bargaining is about. And you know what? The collective and the corrosive power of me is what has motivated folks like the Koch brothers and others to attack collective bargaining. And it's come under withering attack, both here in Congress and in states across this country. But you know what? The labor movement may fall down periodically, but we get back up. And President Obama will always have their back. I will always have their back. And I know you will always have their back as we fight for 15, as we fight for worker voice, as we fight to make sure that when workers succeed, everyone succeeds. As we fight to make sure that workers have a seat at the table. Because you know what? If you're not at the table, you'll be on the menu. And that's not going to happen. So that is why we continue to work. The work I've done in the voting rights context is yet another example of we fall down, but we get up. It was so sadly ironic in the aftermath, in the 50th anniversary celebration of Selma. I found it so sadly ironic that rather than celebrating our success, we were playing defense. And I had a front row seat when I was at the Department of Justice. Because you know what? The Voting Rights Act is one of the crown jewels of a set of crown jewels. It has ensured the franchise, the most important thing that we can ensure on behalf of so many formerly disenfranchised people. The days of counting jelly beans and how many bubbles in soap were supposed to be relegated to the history books. But what we have seen all too frequently is voter ID laws, which are an effort, and frankly, in some cases, a transparent effort. As the congressman from Wisconsin said recently, voter ID is about helping a Republican win the election in November. Or Pennsylvania, a couple years ago, it's about helping us stay in power in Pennsylvania. That's what it's about. And you know what it's about. Voter ID laws, plain and simple, are about making it harder for African Americans and Latinos to vote. That's what they're about, plain and simple. Doesn't take rocket science. And I've seen these cases up close and personal. I've seen the redistricting cases. A case we did against Texas. Footnote 32, if you're looking for homework. At the end of the Texas redistricting case. And I quote, "The parties have provided more evidence of discriminatory intent than we have the space or need to address here." And by the way, that 3-judge panel didn't just have Democrats on it. There were Democrats and Republicans on that panel, and that was a unanimous opinion. And so we continue to move forward on that, but you know what? We've got a lot of work to do. And we will continue to move forward. We'll continue to move forward on the passage of immigration reform and to make sure it's comprehensive and inclusive. We're going to continue to move forward on the passage of minimum wage laws because nobody who works a full-time job should have to live in poverty. And if we're not successful here in the federal government, we continue to work with our partners in state and local governments. Fight for 15 2 years ago was laughed at. You'll never get there. Now, 20% of the nation's population lives in states or localities that have passed or are about to pass $15 minimum wage laws. And that's because of folks like you out there. And that is because of the fourth lesson that I have learned, and it is perhaps the most important lesson. And that is what the president said last year, which is when he was at Selma, the most important word in a democracy. And this is why I come to you with unrelenting optimism. The most important word in a democracy is the simple two-letter word we. The fourth lesson I've learned is that we are stronger together. We are stronger when we understand that America works best when we field a full team. And that we, the people, at every pivotal moment in our nation's history, we have marshaled the collective power of we. It's we, it's not me. That's in the Constitution. And once again, folks, we're at a crossroads. We're in the middle of this critical inflection point where we're discussing not only the issues of paid leave, minimum wage, affordable health care, affordable child care. It's about that, but it's really about who we are as a nation. It's a struggle for where we point our moral compass. It's a test of our values. It's about whether we will continue to move forward or whether we will undo so much of that progress toward a more perfect union. And I'm reminded on a somewhat regular basis when I'm accused of being extreme by some, trying to raise the minimum wage or make sure middle-class jobs pay middle-class wages, in the eyes of some is extreme. Inside voice, Tom. And I'm reminded, though, of a passage from Dr. King. I've read Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail probably 100 times. And in response to claims that he was an extremist, he wrote the following. Was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? This nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And Thomas Jefferson? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or the extension of justice? I am chronically optimistic, my friends, about the path we will choose because we have confronted these questions in the past. As I said before, the Know Nothing movement failed. And the Know Nothing Party failed because this nation chose to summon its better angels, choosing exclusion opportunity over fear, exclusion, and isolation. Joe McCarthy was censured because his Senate colleagues knew that his actions weren't fit for a free nation. And so I am confident moving forward, and I ask for your continued help as we build a more perfect union. I had the privilege of being a son of immigrants from the Dominican Republic. And, we used to talk about these, what I call, where were you moments. Where were you? People would ask my grandfather when Trujillo ordered the massacre of 20,000 Haitians in the mid-30s. And the answer was, he spoke out, he put his life in jeopardy, he put his family in jeopardy. We came to America to escape that, and I'm proud of that. That's what it's about. This is a where were you moment, my friends. And we need ACS to continue to be there with us. We need everybody to marshal the collective power of we. We need to make sure we remember what Dr. King said when he said the arc bends toward justice, the arc of the moral universe, but it does not bend on its own. It only bends when people inside government, people outside government, coming together around a vision of shared prosperity and shared opportunity, come together to build that more perfect union. I'm confident that we will do it. And I'm confident because of the people in this room and the collective power of we. Thank you so much and keep up the great work.